Let's begin with something people often overlook. Geopolitics is never about emotion. It's not about who was loyal yesterday or who stood by whom during a crisis. It's about what works today. The U.S., despite its democratic ideals and public rhetoric, operates with brutal strategic clarity. Right now, its eyes are fixed on one thing: containing China. That's the nucleus around which its entire foreign policy is being restructured. China is the future, and the most important foreign policy is being restructured. And in this new equation, the role of Pakistan is being recalibrated, not because it's strong, but precisely because it's weak enough to be used. Pakistan, with its economic fragility and over-reliance on aid, has become a tool, an expendable pawn. And that suits the U.S. perfectly. Unlike India, Pakistan doesn't ask too many questions, it doesn't challenge decisions, it doesn't resist influence. It needs help, and that need is leverage. Washington understands this game well. When you can't control strength, you control weakness. Pakistan offers access, compliance, and geography, all of which are useful when your main adversary is China and your influence in Asia is waning. What's even more telling is how the U.S. is using this relationship symbolically, sending arms, issuing joint statements, pushing diplomatic sympathy. It's not just about bolstering Pakistan. Sending something to push it back symbolizes pushing diplomatic sympathy. It's not just about bolstering Pakistan. It's about sending a message to India: we have other options. But this is where Washington miscalculates. Because India is not seeking validation, it's seeking balance. India doesn't need American approval to play on the world stage, it has already arrived. When a nation like India starts acting independently, whether in defense, tech, or trade, it threatens the traditional American model of partnership. The U.S. is used to calling the shots. It prefers allies that follow orders, not partners that think for themselves. But India today is driven by vision, not by fear. And that makes it unpredictable and uncontainable. So what does the U.S. do? It turns to the one player it can still influence. It revives old alliances, dusts off military deals, and smiles for the cameras next to Pakistani officials. But behind all this is a sense of unease, a quiet desperation. Washington knows that Pakistan, despite being a willing participant, is not a reliable one. It's unstable, politically fractured, and economically drowning. But still, it's useful. Because when power is slipping from your grip, you don't choose the perfect tool. You choose whatever's available. Let's be clear. The U.S. isn't backing Pakistan because it believes in Pakistan. The U.S. isn't buying safety or calmness as a value, but because it's capable of forming whatever kind of power market you think is going to keep you winning. So, it's backing it because it sees India as a challenge it can no longer control. This isn't partnership, it's compensation. There's also a psychological truth here that we can't ignore. The U.S. has historically operated from a position of dominance. But dominance creates a kind of blindness. When you're used to leading the world, it's hard to accept that others are catching up, or worse, overtaking you. India's rise is not just economic, it's ideological. It's building systems, narratives, and alliances that are no longer dependent on Western approval. And that frightens those who once held the keys. Think about the implications. India is trading in rupees, building indigenous defense systems, and shaping coalitions like BRICS and the International North-South Transport Corridor. These are tectonic shifts. They're not loud, they're not headline-grabbing, but they are deliberate, strategic, and irreversible. And yet, while India plays the long game, the U.S. is reacting out of fear, out of the need to maintain influence in a region that's no longer looking up to it. And in this reactive mode, it's making choices not based on loyalty or logic, but on anxiety. Here's the truth no one wants to say out loud. Superpowers don't always fall because they're defeated. Sometimes they fall because they stop understanding the world they once dominated. They cling to old playbooks, old alliances, and old hierarchies. And while they're busy trying to reassert control, new powers rise. Not by fighting back, but by stepping forward with calm, strategic vision. That's exactly what India is doing, and that's what you must learn from. Don't react to pressure. Don't chase validation. Build your own power base so strong that even global superpowers must rethink how they engage with you. This is true for nations, and it's true for individuals. In the end, the US can back Pakistan all it wants, but the world isn't shaped by who you back. It's shaped by who backs themselves. Let's talk about something that most governments won't say out loud. Desperation is currency. When a nation is drowning, it doesn't negotiate. It surrenders. When a nation is drowning, it doesn't negotiate. It surrenders. And that's what makes Pakistan useful right now. The US isn't partnering with Pakistan because it's a rising force. It's partnering because Pakistan has no real options left. That desperation becomes leverage. That dependence becomes a tool. Now pause and think about this. Pakistan has become exactly what every major power looks for when it's playing chess on the global board. A pawn that can't say no. It's not about loyalty. It's not even about ideology. It's about being cornered. A nation with a collapsing economy, rising inflation, diplomatic isolation, and internal political chaos isn't free. It's available. And the US knows this. Washington doesn't need a strong Pakistan. In fact, a strong Pakistan might resist. What it needs is a Pakistan that's weak enough to follow instructions, to take aid without asking what it costs, and to align itself with any narrative so long as there's money or weapons attached. This is not new. History is filled with examples of great powers using desperate nations as disposable assets. They're praised one day, discarded the next. When they serve a purpose, they're elevated. When they've outlived their usefulness, they're left to collapse. Pakistan in this moment is being positioned exactly like that. And tragically, it doesn't even seem to realize it. Look deeper, and you'll see something else happening beneath the surface. Pakistan has started mistaking survival for strategy. Accepting foreign loans, military aid, and diplomatic cover isn't strategy. It's short-term relief. But relief doesn't build nations. It builds habits. And habits of dependence are the slowest form of collapse. There's a psychological component here too. When a country or a person gets used to being bailed out, they stop building resilience. They stop innovating. They stop planning for the long game. Why would they when someone else is always expected to save them? But here's the problem. The world only saves those it can still use. Once your value drops, your calls go unanswered. That's the painful truth about Pakistan's current relationship with the US. It's not built on trust. It's built on transaction. It's not about shared values. It's about shared convenience. And this convenience is temporary. Think about the moves. Military cooperation revived, arms deals signed, diplomatic attention restored. But none of this is rooted in Pakistan's strength. It's all built on what it can offer in exchange for survival. Geography, intelligence cooperation, pressure tactics on India. These are short-term bargaining chips and not long-term foundations. Now contrast that with India. India doesn't need aid. It doesn't take dictation. It doesn't bend at the knees to fit someone else's narrative. That's why India frustrates superpowers. It refuses to act like a pawn. It behaves like a player, and the world deep down respects that. Pakistan, on the other hand, keeps choosing the easy path, and that's what makes it vulnerable to manipulation. A country that always chooses relief over reform will always stay on a leash, someone else's leash. Whether that leash is held in Washington or Beijing doesn't matter. What matters is that it's not held by Pakistan itself. If we look at it from a broader philosophical lens, we begin to understand something fundamental. Dependence is the opposite of dignity. You can't build a strong identity, personal or national on the back of someone else's generosity. That kind of strength is always rented, and rent is always due. What the US is doing isn't cruel, it's calculated. It's using what's available, not what's ideal. Pakistan is available, but there's a cost to being the easy option. You're the first to be used and the first to be left behind. This should be a wake-up call, not just for nations, but for people listening today, because the same principles apply to your own life. If you live waiting for someone to save you, to promote you, to give you a break, you'll always be dependent. But if you invest in becoming useful on your own terms, people won't use you, they'll respect you. Pakistan is being used because it's not respected. And it's not respected because it hasn't built the kind of independence that earns it. Nations, like people, must earn their freedom, not with slogans, but with substance. So here's the takeaway. Never confuse attention with admiration. Pakistan is getting attention, yes, but it's not admiration, it's utility. And utility fades fast. Build yourself up so you're not chosen because you're desperate, but because you're indispensable. Let's shift our focus to a reality that's quietly rewriting global power structures. India has become the superpower that America can't control, and that alone changes everything. You see, the old model of international relations was built on obedience. The US was comfortable with allies who needed it, militarily, economically, diplomatically. It preferred relationships where influence was easy to apply and harder to resist. But India doesn't fit into that structure anymore. It's not just rising, it's rising on its own terms. And that independence is what unsettles the existing order. What makes India so unique right now isn't just GDP growth or military upgrades. It's the mindset behind those actions. It's the shift from dependence to sovereignty, from asking for permission to setting its own direction. Unlike many nations that still tie their future to Western partnerships, India is choosing self-respect over approval. That's a mental leap, one that most of the world hasn't made yet. This is where the real story begins. India has reached a point where it no longer defines its value based on Western acceptance. That's revolutionary, because once a nation or a person stops needing to be accepted, it becomes dangerous to those who built systems based on control. It becomes unpredictable. And in geopolitics, unpredictability is power. Think about it. India buys oil from Russia, despite US pressure. It builds defense systems with France, Israel, and even indigenously. It pushes for de-dollarization, trades in rupees, and champions a multipolar world. These aren't just moves. They're messages. Messages that say, we're not here to be managed, we're here to lead. And leadership isn't loud. It doesn't always come with announcements or media fanfare. Sometimes it's the quiet decisions behind closed doors, the ones that shift economies, strengthen borders, and build future alliances that show who's really in control. India is doing exactly that. It's acting, not reacting. There's also a deep psychological shift happening here. When a country like India chooses autonomy over alignment, it's making a philosophical statement. It's saying, we trust ourselves. That's rare in today's world. Most nations still believe they need someone stronger to hold their hand. But when you start believing in your own capacity, you stop selling your sovereignty for short-term security. And that's what terrifies the US, even if it won't admit it. Because for decades, America has been the center of gravity. Others orbited around it. But now, India is creating its own gravitational pull, attracting partners, not followers. BRICS is growing, the global south is uniting, India is becoming a platform, not just a participant. But here's the subtle genius in all of this. India isn't doing it with aggression. It's not trying to replace America. It's simply refusing to be shaped by it. That kind of quiet confidence is what marks a mature power. It's the same confidence you see in leaders who don't shout in meetings, but when they speak, everyone listens. Why? Because they've built something real, something respected. This is what many still don't understand. Power today doesn't just come from weapons or wealth. It comes from narrative control, from who tells the story, who sets the terms, who defines what's normal. And India is beginning to tell its own story globally. Whether it's through yoga, digital infrastructure like UPI, or its expanding cultural influence, India is exporting more than goods. It is expanding more than goods. It's exporting identity. And let's be honest, this isn't just about geopolitics. It's about how we all need to think. The message India sends the world is the same message you need in your life. If you want to be truly respected, stop trying to fit into someone else's structure. Build your own. India isn't acting out of defiance. It's acting out of design. It's building a world where it doesn't have to choose between the West and the East. It's choosing itself. That's the future. Not picking sides, but being a side worth picking. So when America backs Pakistan and tries to pressure India through indirect moves, it's not just politics. It's a last-ditch attempt to influence a player that's outgrown its leash. India doesn't bite the bait anymore. It doesn't dance to someone else's tune. And that's the real shift. The world isn't just watching a new power rise. It's watching an old one adapt or fall behind. And that's the lesson. Power built on control fades. Power built on confidence lasts. In life, as in geopolitics, don't aim to be the favorite. Aim to be the force. Let's break a myth that many people still believe. If you don't make noise, you're not doing anything. But that's not how power works. The strongest players don't always shout. They act. Quietly, strategically, and with a vision that outlasts short-term drama. That's exactly what India is doing right now. The world expected India to react loudly when the US started tilting toward Pakistan again. They expected anger, speeches, maybe sanctions or retaliation. But what did India do? Nothing. Visibly. And yet, everything silently. Because India understands something most people don't. Real strength doesn't react emotionally. It calculates long-term outcomes. India's response to the US-Pakistan equation is not driven by insecurity. It's not trying to prove anything. That's the mark of maturity. When you've truly grown, you stop responding to every provocation. You choose your moments, and you make your moves with precision, not panic. Right now, while the US is making short-term tactical choices, India is making long-term strategic investments. It's not chasing headlines, it's building ecosystems. While others argue in front of cameras, India is locking down energy deals, laying down fiber cables, upgrading defense capabilities, expanding digital infrastructure, and opening new trade corridors. These things don't make the evening news, but they're the foundation of future power. And here's the psychological shift. India isn't thinking like a regional actor anymore. It's thinking like a global designer. It's not looking to fit into existing power structures. It's creating new ones. Whether it's the International Solar Alliance, the India-Middle East-Europe Economic Corridor, or its leadership in BRICS, India is shaping spaces where its voice isn't just heard, it's central. When a country stops trying to compete for attention and starts building influence instead, that's when transformation happens. That's when the world stops seeing you as one of many and starts seeing you as essential. Even its defense posture is changing, not through aggression, but through autonomy. India is rapidly increasing its indigenous weapons production. Why? Because it wants strategic independence. When you can defend yourself, you don't need to beg for support. You negotiate from strength. You're no longer pressured into deals you don't need. You choose who to work with and on what terms. And in diplomacy, India isn't aligning blindly with any bloc. It maintains ties with the West, with Russia, with Iran, with Southeast Asia. It doesn't play the loyalty game. It plays the balance game. And that's the game that winners play. Think about this. While Pakistan is begging the IMF and leaning on foreign support to stay afloat, India is offering credit lines to other countries. That's the difference between surviving and leading. And India is quietly stepping into the leadership role others thought would take decades. But here's the deeper insight. India's silence is not weakness, it's strategy. There's an old saying, the tiger doesn't have to announce it's a tiger. That's the level India is moving toward. It's not interested in applause, it's interested in results. It's also taking control of its own narrative. For decades, others defined what India was. Now, India is telling its own story, in its own voice, through its own platforms, backed by its own data and protected by its own systems. That's power. Not the kind that flexes in front of cameras, but the kind that endures when the spotlight moves away. This kind of leadership is subtle. It's not always obvious. But if you watch carefully, you'll see it in the way India positions itself in every conversation. Calm, calculated, confident. It's not flattered by attention, nor rattled by criticism. That's a sign of internal strength. It's psychological sovereignty. And that's far more valuable than any public endorsement. So when you see the US cozying up to Pakistan again, don't mistake it as a blow to India. It's actually a sign of the US trying to hedge its bets because it knows it can't control India anymore. It's a sign of frustration, not strategy. And here's the takeaway for all of us. When you know your value, you don't need to respond to every slight. You don't need to defend your worth. You build in silence. You move with intention. And eventually the world has no choice but to recognize what you've become. India's response isn't in speeches. It's in moves. Quiet, smart, game-changing moves. Let's talk about what's really happening behind the scenes. When you see the US suddenly warming up to Pakistan again, offering military aid, extending diplomatic support, and acting as if the past 2 decades of strained relations never happened, you have to ask yourself one thing. Why now? Why bring a struggling, unstable partner back into the fold? The answer isn't about Pakistan. It's about fear. Fear of losing control over a region that is no longer waiting for American permission to rise. You see, for decades, the US enjoyed a comfortable position in Asia. It was the dominant voice in military alliances, economic partnerships, and technological development. But that position is no longer guaranteed because there's a shift happening, quietly but powerfully. Countries like India are no longer passive participants. They're shaping new systems, creating new networks, and defining new standards. And that is what truly unsettles the American establishment. The backing of Pakistan isn't a sign of confidence. It's a sign of anxiety. It's like someone who used to run the whole game now realizing that the players are forming their own teams with new rules, and they're not asking for instructions. So what does the old leader do? They look for ways to influence the board, again, even if it means supporting a weaker, more controllable piece. Here's the truth. The US doesn't trust Pakistan more than India. It's not blind to Pakistan's instability, but it sees a tactical opportunity because when India chooses independence, economic, diplomatic, technological, America feels it slipping away. So it grabs onto whatever can still be moved. And right now, Pakistan is movable, not because it's strong, but because it's vulnerable. This is the bigger game. It's not about friendship or shared values. It's about relevance. The US is trying to stay relevant in an Asia where its traditional tools of control, military bases, economic aid, and diplomatic dominance are losing their edge. And let's be honest, India is at the center of that shift. India is doing something that few countries have done successfully. It's creating a new balance where it maintains good relations with the West but doesn't depend on it. It engages with Russia and China but doesn't surrender to them. It builds its own tech, its own currency systems, its own defense platforms. That kind of positioning doesn't just make you powerful, it makes you untouchable. And for a superpower used to steering the world, that's deeply frustrating. So the move to back Pakistan again isn't a strategy, it's a reaction. And reactive moves are rarely sustainable. They come from fear, not foresight. When a nation acts out of fear, it tries to slow down others instead of strengthening itself. That's what this is. An attempt to pressure India into compliance by reviving a regional counterweight. But here's the flaw in that plan. The India of today doesn't flinch. It doesn't panic when old powers play their usual tricks. It simply adapts and continues. Because India isn't building its future based on what others are doing. It's building it based on a long-term vision of sovereignty and leadership. There's a deep lesson here. If your influence relies on control, it will eventually collapse. Control is external. It can be resisted. It can be rejected. You can't be stern. It can't be. But when a nation builds influence based on contribution, on innovation, trade, knowledge, resilience, that kind of influence is internal. It lasts. And it inspires others to follow, not because they're forced to, but because they see value in alignment. India's contributing. It's not begging. It's not posturing. It's building. The US, by choosing to lean on old tactics, is exposing its own insecurity, because true power doesn't react to independence, it respects it. But when power starts reacting, it shows the beginning of decline, not necessarily in wealth or weapons, but in clarity, in adaptability, in relevance. And this applies to your life too. If you lead by trying to control people, they will eventually resist you. But if you lead by creating value, by showing vision, by becoming indispensable, then you don't need to hold power. People will give it to you willingly. The world is watching the US act out of fear and India respond with calm. That contrast speaks volumes. One is trying to hold on, the other is moving forward. There's a question we all need to ask ourselves, not just as nations, but as individuals. How do you respond when you're ignored, underestimated, or even betrayed? Do you complain? Do you react emotionally? Or do you reposition yourself so powerfully that silence becomes your weapon and growth becomes your answer? That's exactly what India is teaching us right now. It's not just responding to geopolitical shifts. It's rewriting the playbook on how power is earned, not granted. India, rising from the ashes, is bringing people back to the present in search of a new paradigm. And if you're paying attention, there's a personal lesson buried in that global story. We live in a world where people expect immediate reactions. You're criticized and they want to come back. You're doubted and they want you to prove yourself instantly. But true strength doesn't operate on demand. It waits. It builds. It creates such undeniable value that even your biggest critics are forced to watch, because ignoring you is no longer an option. Look at what India is doing. Instead of reacting with anger to America's support for Pakistan, it's focusing inward. It's investing in itself, growing its digital economy, scaling its defense manufacturing, pushing innovation in fintech, biotech, and space. It's not begging to be noticed. It's becoming impossible to ignore. That's not just strategy. That's psychology. That's philosophy. You don't get strong by screaming louder. You get strong by becoming so self-reliant that no one can shake your foundation. When the US backed Pakistan, India didn't spiral into insecurity. It looked at the move and said, "That's your play. Now here's mine." And its play wasn't loud. It was layered. Global partnerships, economic corridors, quiet alliances, long-term influence. And that's what separates smart leadership from emotional reaction. The ability to choose positioning over provocation. Now think about this in your own life. Every time someone overlooks you, you have two options. You can chase them, try to prove your worth to people who've already made up their mind, or you can elevate yourself so high that they have to rethink everything they thought about you. India is doing that on the global stage. It's building the kind of nation that doesn't need external approval to know its value. And when you reach that point, when your strength comes from within, every attempt to manipulate you falls flat. You are no longer at the mercy of global moods. You are the mood. And this is where Jack Ma's mindset resonates. He often said, you should learn from your competitor, but never copy. Copy and you die. That applies to nations too. India isn't copying the US model. It's not imitating China. It's not mimicking Russia. It's doing something much harder. Inventing its own model, one that blends tradition with tech, history with innovation, self-reliance with smart diplomacy. That kind of originality comes with friction. The world doesn't always like those who stop following and start leading. But leaders don't wait for applause. They focus on outcomes. And if you zoom out, you realize this moment in history is about more than just foreign policy. It's about mindset. It's about choosing to think like a creator, not a consumer of power. Pakistan is still consuming influence, still asking for help, still waiting to be validated. India has become a creator of systems, alliances, and narratives. That's the shift. That's the lesson. Don't think like a follower. Think like a designer. Don't spend energy reacting to the moves of others. Spend energy building something so complete that no reaction is needed. Spend energy building something so complete that no reaction is needed. That's what India is doing. And it's what each of us can do in our lives, careers, and countries. Because in the end, you are only as powerful as your ability to act independently, not just physically.